Subject of His grace reaches me. We began the year by just talking about the place of grace, that it all begins with God. It's a place of salvation, a place where we stand. It's a place of steadfastness. Then we took and we talked about the face of grace. What does grace look like? And we found out that there are certain things that we find that there's a problem with most of us and how we perceive grace, because we have difficulty finding God's grace in things that we consider to be ungraceful. When God perhaps doesn't bless us the way that we think He ought to, that we have difficulty making that a part of God's gracious face. When He gives us blessings, when we receive the things we ask for, definitely those are easy to identify as grace. We talked about that problem. We looked at the plea that the Apostle Paul presented to the Father in his struggle to find God's grace. 3 times he had petitioned God to remove that thorn in the flesh. And God's response was that my grace is sufficient for you. And so we looked at the principle of the all-sufficiency of grace, and how that we need to understand that even in moments when things are not going the way we would like for them to be, that God's grace is still all-sufficient, even during those troublesome times. Now, I shared Tuesday morning at the prayer breakfast, I said, guys, I still don't know where I want to go in my lessons. I said, I got this A and I got this B. And one of them said, well, how about B? And one of them said, how about A? So I went with C. No, actually, I was saying, I think it would be so fun to take the book of Nehemiah and study it from the perspective of grace. You know, many of us have studied the book of Nehemiah, and probably from the standpoint of leadership and involvement and positive construction kind of things, and we've studied the book in that light. But to look at the book of Nehemiah from the perspective of God's grace is something that the whole concept just excites me. So now we've looked at the place of grace and the face of grace. Now we're going to trace grace. Now it's not a trace of grace, but we're going to trace grace in the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to discover that there's just some remarkable elements of God's grace in that book. And this morning, all I want to do is kind of introduce us to the concept of the significance of grace in the book of Nehemiah. The place and the face of God's grace become controlling factors in one's life vision. When we finally get a hold of, like the Apostle Paul did, that the troubles that we have with the face of God's grace can all be solved by bringing ourselves to the point that God's grace is sufficient. And when we begin to live and understand that the place of grace is God, that it is all sufficient. There's no lack of grace. There's nothing I can do to add to grace. God fills it all up. God is it. He is the God of all grace, is what 1 Peter told us. So when we finally get a hold of that, that controls the vision of life that we hold. It determines how we are going to process things. You see, a grace-built life vision controls our purpose. It controls our direction. It enables us to live in the all-sufficiency of grace regardless of critics and regardless of situations. We have a life vision that is made up of things that are bigger than this life because they're compiled on the grace issues of life. When such a grace vision is lost, life becomes aimless, confusing, and controlled by every ugly circumstance we encounter. Now, folks, I'm not asking us to think outside of the box. This is just realism. You will recognize it in your own life. When you take your eyes off of the grace of God, then all of a sudden you have no purpose. Life is confusing. There's no direction. We end up allowing every circumstance to totally throw us off of our spiritual kilter. That's what happens when we lose our grace vision. Hope turns hopeless. Energy is muted. Curiosity is crucified, and the state of ruin becomes the habitual expectation. That's what happens when we lose sight of God's grace. Our life vision turns bad. No hope, no energy, no curiosity, no nothing. Spiritual life becomes doldrum. Some illustrations of this. Not necessarily spiritual, just illustrations. Thomas Watson, the chairman of IBM in 1943, I'm going to tell you, this guy wishes he never said this. But here's what he said. I think there is a market for maybe 5 computers in the world. Now, this is back in the time when a computer would have been probably as big as this room. And his vision was, maybe we could get 5 of these in the world. Or a memo that was sent amongst the rulers and the officials of Western Union said this: the telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. We're just going to stick with the that's much more effective. Okay, how about this one? Decca Recording Company turned down signing the Beatles in 1962 because they said, I don't like the sound, sound and guitar music is on the way out. Or this, Charles Duell, Commissioner of the U.S. Office of Patents in 1899. Again, one of those things you wish nobody would have ever heard you say. He said, everything that can be invented has already been invented. I don't know, that's not much for job security either, was it? Helen Keller one time was asked what she considered would be worse than being born blind. And her response was this: having sight without vision. Having sight without vision. Folks, that's what we're talking about. You see, when we comprehend God's grace, we get a life vision that is so much bigger than sight. To adapt her statement, there is no true spiritual insight without a vision of and a connection to God's grace. We have no spiritual insight unless it's centered upon the grace of God, unless it's connected to the grace of God. This means that once a believer understands the God of all grace and the face of grace, they acquire a life vision that is measured, manipulated, and maintained by the grace of God. And again, we have struggled with trying to comprehend God's grace and to live in God's grace and to understand all the ins and outs of that. But didn't you love the Proverbs reading this morning? That when you and I get understanding and when we get wisdom, what do we get? We get a garland of grace. You see, we need to understand some things so that we get this life vision of God's grace. As we start this journey through Nehemiah on a search for the elements of God's grace, we begin with this truism. One's encounter with God's grace is equal to their life vision. Right now, the vision that you are holding of your life is controlled by how much you are living within a sense of God's grace. Right now. Doesn't matter who we are. Doesn't matter what issues we're dealing with. It doesn't matter, what is before us, what is behind us. Right now, whatever my life vision is in direct correlation to my understanding of God's grace. If I am mad at God, if I think God has done me wrong, if I believe God could correct something and He's chosen not to, and I have an element of distrust, that controls my life vision. On the other hand, struggle with it as I may, if I believe that whatever situation and circumstance has come my way has come to me within the boundaries of the all-sufficiency of God's grace, I may walk slowly, I may stumble, but if I live with that concept, that's controlling my life vision. So, that's what we're going to find as we begin our study of the book of Nehemiah. For actually, what we get out of Nehemiah is finding that God's grace always provides a clear life vision. That's what we're going to find in the book of Nehemiah. That God's grace always provides a clear life vision. We will find it in people that we will identify as leaders. We will find it in people who are workers. We will find it in the job that they undertake. They have a clear life vision. And it's all centered upon the grace of God. We will identify, we will discover, we will get excited about that. Most of us are familiar with the fact that the book of Nehemiah is about the process of rebuilding the wall around the city of Jerusalem. And that the city has been overpowered, the citizens have been taken, and now then they're allowing them to return, giving them the choice to rebuild the city, and yet things have kind of not gone according to schedule. Things have been too slow. And so there's this desire to get this completed. This grace vision will lead to some mighty measures as the masons lay the mortar. However, I don't want to even begin in Nehemiah as we start our study today. We're going to go to a gentleman named Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 22. Listen carefully as we go through this prophecy about this place. What troubles you now? That you have all gone up on the roofs. O town full of commotion, O city of tumult and revelry, your slain were not killed by the sword, nor did they die in battle. All of your leaders have fled together. They have been captured without using the bow. All you who were caught were taken prisoner together, having fled while the enemy was still far away. Therefore I said, turn away from me. Let me weep bitterly. Do not try to console me over the destruction of my people. The Lord Almighty, has a day of tumult and trampling and terror in the valley of vision, a day of battering down walls and crying out to the mountains. Elam takes up the quiver, and her charioteers and horses. Kir uncovers the shield. Your choicest valleys are full of chariots, and horsemen are posted at the city gates. The defenses of Judah are stripped away, and you looked in the day of the weapons in the palace of the forest. You saw that the city of David had many breaches in its defenses. You stored up water in the lower pool. You counted the buildings in Jerusalem and tore down houses to strengthen the wall. You built a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool, but you did not look to the one who made it or have regard for the one who planned it long ago. Now, God's talking in this prophecy about the same place, Jerusalem. But it's really interesting the way that Isaiah prophesies about this city. First of all, the description is that Jerusalem is in a terrible uproar. The picture is the people have run to the rooftops, that bodies are everywhere, that the leaders have left and fled and left the people without any leadership, and that the people are basically just running around in great fear and controlled by unimaginable fears. That is the condition that Isaiah says the city of Jerusalem is in. Now, for comparison, and to get us at least thinking about this, we're looking for God's grace amid that kind of situation. Because this is God describing the condition existing in Jerusalem, and now that we're going to be looking at how Nehemiah comes into that kind of a situation and rebuilds the consensus of grace and gets things accomplished. What does your dwelling look like? The place where you and God have a together place. Your Mount Zion, your Jerusalem, your temple, Mark. What does that look like? Is it a place where God's grace is so in control that even amid all of the turmoil, there is this overarching, overriding, God's grace is sufficient? I will find peace, I will experience peace. Or does our city look like people running around on the rooftops? Now, why do I'll tell you what the vision I got when I read this and studied this was Katrina. And everything that I saw on the news about New Orleans during that time is a description here. People running to the rooftops. Why? Because that was a safe place to be. Bodies all over. People controlled by fear. Leaders run off. Is that the condition of our spiritual dwelling? Where God and I are together, do we have that kind of offering that we're giving God? Now Isaiah says the city of God is going to do that. It accomplishes that. And I love God's response. God's response is, don't even bother me, just leave me alone in my grief. You have turned away from me, you've done your own thing, and don't even come to me. Now I realize that doesn't sound like our God. But it's an illustration of the condition of these people and why they're in that condition. We continue on. Confusion and terror have defeated the people. As we think about this, one of the interesting things is that Isaiah refers to this as the valley of vision. But the valley of vision is filled with arrows and chariots of the enemy. Remember what we said earlier, our life vision, if it's not controlled by grace, it's going to be controlled by things like this. It's going to be controlled by enemy's arrows. It's going to be controlled by chariots of the enemy. It's going to be controlled by all of the fears that this life puts out there. And what God says of the city of Jerusalem, the Mount of Zion, it is the valley of vision, but it's not a vision of God. It is so not a vision of God that God says, don't even call out to me. I'm so sad I can't even answer you right now. Why? Because you have set your life vision on the enemies. How did Jerusalem respond to all this? Well, first of all, it says that they ran to the palace in the forest to seek their weapons. Again, remember the description of the turmoil of the city. And what are the people doing? Let's go arm ourselves. Let's get stronger. Again, how many times do we find ourselves in that same predicament? As our life vision loses focus of the grace of God and we decide, I just need more strength. I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I need more commitment. I need this. I need that. I need to accomplish such and such. What's happening? We're running to the forest looking for the palace of our weapons. Did it help Jerusalem? No. They ran for their weapons. They stored up their water. They also tear down their houses to reinforce the walls. Again, get the picture of the terror. The enemy is trying to breach their protection, and people are ripping apart their houses and throwing them up against the wall. Again, how many times if our life vision gets corrupt, we start tearing apart good stuff. We start ripping apart that which is good to defend against something that we can't defend against anyway. What we need to do is to bring ourselves back to the grace of God. And then they built that moat between the walls, apparently. So, they'd lost their grace vision. They had lost that. In truth, it is that loss which has driven he who is all grace to that point of grief where he has induced a separation from the people. You know, probably, if you're a parent, there's probably been moments in your life, and there may even be moments that you have actually worded these words to your children. I'm just too mad to talk to you right now. Just go to your room. I'm just so disappointed in you, I cannot speak to you right now. That's where our God was. Your vision has become so corrupt, I just can't deal with you right now. I can't do it. Why, God? Verse 11 says, but you never asked for help from the one who did all this. You never considered the one who planned this long ago. At that time, the Lord of heaven's armies called you to weep and mourn. He told you to shave your heads in sorrow for your sins and to wear clothes of burlap to show your remorse. But instead, you dance and play. You slaughter cattle and kill sheep. You feast on meat and drink wine. You say, let's feast and drink, for tomorrow we die. God says, the reason I can't deal with you right now is because in the times when I told you, set your life vision on my grace, you were too busy partying. You were doing your own thing. You were allowing other things to set your life vision. Things that were going to not be able to sustain any kind of life vision. The momentary, let's eat, drink, and be merry. The Epicurean philosophy. That's what was controlling your life. Now, you didn't come to me. You didn't ask me. You didn't seek me. God's people lost their grace vision, and the valley of vision lies in defeat because they, first of all, trusted in their own strength and their own defenses. And then secondly, because, and this is, these words that God gave through Isaiah, these have got to be some of the most heart-wrenching words ever came out of the Father's mouth. You never asked for help. You never asked for help from the one who did all this. You never considered the one who planned it long ago. You never came to me. You never came to me. You see, when we allow the negative situations of life to set our life vision, and we seek our own strength and our own weaponry without going to God, it just breaks his heart. Because he's the God of all grace. God of all grace. Proverbs says, and you remember the King James, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint. How blessed is he who keeps the law. Young's literal translation, without a vision is a people made naked. And whoso is keeping the law, oh, his happiness. Without a vision, we're just nothing but naked people. Jerusalem is usually referenced not as a valley, but as a what? It's a mountain. Mount Zion. Mountain of God, mountain of the Lord. Usually it's referenced as this high point. But here Isaiah references it as a valley, and there is the Kidron Valley that runs to the east of Jerusalem. But I don't think that's necessarily at all what Isaiah is wanting to portray. I think this is truly a mournful prophecy, not about a valley, a physical valley, but about a valley of blindness, about a valley where grace vision has been defeated because people have failed to turn to the face of God. They have failed to live by the all-sufficiency of God's grace. They've trusted in themselves. They've played whatever they wanted to play. They've done it their way. And as a result, they've lost their life vision and have no longer are they the mountain of the Lord. They are the valley of vision. Maybe even more accurately, the valley of no vision. Part of the excitement within Nehemiah is that not only is Jerusalem's wall going to be restored, but the people's grace vision is going to be restored as well. And that's some of the excitement at looking at the whole book. And that reconstruction may be directly connected to their experience of graceless living. In other words, the reason the people are ready to get back into a grace vision that controls their life vision is because they've been in the valley. They've been on the rooftop seeking safety. They've witnessed dead people lying all around. They have seen that the things they have done have not worked. They've witnessed that. They've been in the valley. And so because they've been in that valley, they are now ready to reshape their life vision. A very often used poem, but one that fits well into our discussion, called The Valleys. Sometimes life seems hard to bear, full of sorrows, trouble, and woe. It's then I need to remember that it's in the valleys I grow. If I always stay on the mountaintop and never experience pain, there we go, I would never appreciate God's love and would be living in vain. I have so much to learn, and my growth is very slow. Sometimes I need the mountaintops, but it's in the valleys I grow. I do not always understand why things happen as they do, but I am very sure of one thing: the Lord will see me through. My little valleys are nothing when I picture Christ on the cross. He went through the valley of death. His victory was Satan's loss. Forgive me, Lord, for complaining when I'm feeling so very low, and just give me a gentle reminder that it's in the valleys I grow. Continue to strengthen me, Lord, and use my life each day to share your love with others and help them find their way. Thank you for valleys, Lord. For this one thing I know: the mountaintops are glorious, but it's in the valleys I grow. How many of us today are dwelling in a grace valley, where our life vision has lost sight of the glorious mountaintop of the grace of God? Let us not punish ourselves for being there. Let's understand that it's in those valleys that we're given the opportunity to rekindle our trust in the grace of God. We do not become disheartened. Our city may lay in ruins, the walls torn down, but it's our vision of God's grace based upon that valley that will lead us up the mountain. The book of Nehemiah will inspire those who have gotten bogged down in the valley of self-reliance, who have grown weary of the endless attacks from enemy near and far, who have forgotten to seek the Lord. Will again see the benefits of a new grace vision. Our study of Nehemiah will help reinforce those who have found their armies empty of appropriate weaponry, those who have hoarded water and yet are dying of spiritual thirst will again come to the one who is the water of life and be able to envision him in new ways. Those who have run out of wall fortifications, those who have started tearing down things that are healthy and good so that you can protect yourself against things that you can't protect yourself against anyway, will come to the realization that God's grace will bring that protection into my life. This is going to be the beauty of our study in the book of Nehemiah. In these walls of renovation, we will discover a grace vision that moves leaders like leaders have never been moved before. We will discover that there is a sense of mission that permeates a people. Never have they had the kind of devotion to mission that we will find once the grace vision is restored. We will find that people involve themselves, all kinds of people involve themselves when the grace vision is established. We will even find on numerous occasions that there are those who stand in direct opposition to that grace-filled, motivated life, that life vision that's controlled by the all-sufficiency of God's grace. And we will find that those oppositions are dealt with and people moved on and maintained their commitment. And then we will find an amazing fact, and that is that this whole sense of a grace-controlled life vision is always renewable. This is not a book you check out from the library and have to take it back in 2 weeks and can't get it again. This is always renewable. So when I move from the mountaintop of living in life vision controlled by God's grace and I fall into the valley, guess what? I can renew my spirit again. I can light upon the wings like an eagle. I can soar again, renewed again and again and again. And we will find that in the book of Nehemiah. There are none of us who have to stay where we're at. It's always a renewable. Talk about renewable resources, right? I want to end today by just looking at how Jerusalem's ancient inhabitants were only able to eke out a meager existence when they didn't have a grace vision. Nehemiah chapter 1. In late autumn, in the month of Kislev in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was at the fortress of Susa. Hananiah, one of my brothers, came to visit me with some other men who had just arrived from Judah. I asked them about the Jews who had returned there from captivity and about how things were going in Jerusalem. And they said to me, "They're not going well. For those who returned to the province of Judah, they're in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem has been torn down, the gates have been destroyed by fire." When I heard this, I sat down and wept. In fact, for days I mourned, fasting and praying to the God of heaven. Without a grace vision, these people were in great trouble. The original word means to put off, to expose. It has to do, originally it was used of a field in the wintertime, how that field would basically be naked. There'd be nothing that could grow on that field. And here is God saying, when people didn't have a grace vision, they're like a winter field. They're naked. They're also in disgrace. The original word indicates moral evil. You see, what happens when we lose the sufficiency of God's grace is we also tend to lose our morality. Now, I'm not talking, we may be talking about just losing the ability to be tolerant and to forgive, not things that you and I usually think of as being immoral, but are they not immoral? If we lose our grace focus, we find that evil will return. And this book will recount how the naked are covered and how soiled morality is eradicated within the power of a renewed grace vision. And next time, we'll begin to watch as that rebirth of this new grace vision takes place in the book of Nehemiah.